new Nissan has become a bit of a rarity on our roads these days, but the company says that things are about to change. But what has us more excited is the car that's leading this. It's the Nissan X Trail, which is back in India after a gap of over 10 years. So can it shake things up? Let's find out. The Nissan X Trail has grown quite a bit since it was last here, which makes this SUV hold its own in a segment where size matters. That said, there are flashier, larger options still. Similarly, the X Trail takes a more restrained approach with its details, but the large, V-shaped grille and the wide, tiered headlamps make their presence felt. You have some neat, practical touches like the closing air dam covers and a good 210 mm of ground clearance. These go well with the simple shapes and the tall, functional glass area. Nissan has broken from the norm and fitted the X Trail with large 20-inch wheels. These give the car a fuller look and a good stance. Now, one of the things that Nissan is talking about with the X Trail is its practicality, but what you have is not a powered tailgate, which is something you expect in a car in this segment. But once you open the boot, you realize that even with all the 3 rows up, there's a decent amount of space here. You can put, say, a small backpack or 2 here. And yes, you can also fold these flat, and that's when you have a fairly usable boot space. So yeah, you don't get a spare wheel, which we think will be a bit of an issue in India. But having said that, the load lip, as you can see, is flat. It's a flat floor, so big items. They're a bit of a lift, but once inside, they should be easy to fit. The styling here continues with that simple, unfussy theme, with the mildly contoured bootlet and fairly catchy rear lights, although full LED setup is missing here. Now inside the X Trail, you notice that it has that typical Japanese sort of simplicity and practicality, even in the way the interiors look. Now, yeah, the design itself is pretty simple and straightforward. It's nothing extraordinary, nothing flashy, over the top, nothing of that sort. But yeah, the colors and textures really do make a difference. In fact, I would say that they are quite a highlight of this car. Now that also continues with the stitching, and even on the doors, if you notice the wearing texture, for example, the fabric inserts here, or even the stitching here, or even this sort of brushed wood finish. But again, what takes this experience a step further are the controls. For example, I'll just show you. Everything, there's a physical control for. All the ACs have these big chunky knobs that you can use very easily without being distracted. Same for the touchscreen controls, big chunky buttons. This gear selector here, it feels really expensive to use with this electronic sort of action. And that also continues, as you'll see, with this nice damped action to the stalks and to these buttons on the steering wheel. The center console here has good space with its open lower section and the deep storage bin. You get both Type A and Type C charge ports, as well as a wireless charger. Most controls here are well placed too. That being said, the door pockets could have been larger. In this context, the small 8-inch touchscreen feels out of place. It seems like the same unit that was used on the Kicks 5 years ago and feels like such in practice. The graphics have been updated, and it is a generally competent system that's easy to learn with its physical controls, but the fluidity and responses leave much to be desired. In stark contrast to this is the 12.3-inch driver's display. This is easy to read and configure, information is easily accessed, and you have some uniquely detailed gauges for the engine that add a bit more to the experience. Now, the sense of quality that you find in the first row isn't exactly repeated here. You notice a few more scratchy plastics, more visibly apparent, but what you do get is some immense practicality. As you can see, this slides with quite a good degree of travel, and the same can be said of this part. It's a 40-20-40 split for this big section as well. It will slide in a similar way, but what you also get is very comfortable angle of recline. So yeah, as you can see, I have more than adequate leg room, knee room, so even someone who's over 6 feet will not have a problem, and even headroom is really quite good with the sunroof too. And of course, with the sunroof and these large windows, you do have a nice big airy feel. But having said that, because of this practicality and because we're fitting an extra row at the back, this bench maybe could have been slightly longer. That's not the case. So you sometimes do find that under thigh support could have been slightly better, especially considering how nice the front seats are. And you also notice that maybe these seats could have been better contoured. They could have had a touch more support. To fit a third passenger, they've sort of made it quite flat. And then in terms of amenities, you don't have a climate zone here, which some cars in the segment provide, but you do get AC vents and, like in the front, a Type C and a Type A port. Here are some of the notable features that you get on the X Trail. Now you get doors which open 85 degrees in the X Trail. Now of course a good use of that, it makes ingress egress into the second row very easy, but another use for it is that you enter the third row. Now let's be very clear, this is not a full 7-seater, it's best described as a 5+2. As you can see, getting in is not very easy, you have to be quite fit, and even when I am here, there's really not much space. As you can see, if I leave a reasonable amount of space for the second row passenger, this is how much space I have. It's really not a very comfortable space. I have to tuck my feet deep into the second row of seats. These seats do recline. They're a 50-50 split. I'll just show you how they work. So they do recline to a certain angle, but again, it's not an easy adjustment, as you can see. But yeah, for adults, I wouldn't suggest even short trips, maybe children, yes. And you do get some amenities. There are no AC vents here, which is going to be a bit of an issue in our climate. But you do get cup holders and some hooks and of course seat belts. There is no ADAS, but you get fairly clear front and rear cameras, 7 airbags including a unique center airbag between the front passengers. There's also a limited slip differential for better control. Now, given that practicality has been a big theme with this car, that also translates into the way the X Trail drives, and it's apparent really as soon as you start driving. So what you notice is that the view out is good. The windows, they have this low sill, so there aren't too many blind spots. You can see the bonnet, the edges of it pretty clearly, and even the driving position, you sit high up like how you want to in an SUV. Everything falls to hand easily. These armrests, they just fit you perfectly. The seat is really quite supportive. The Nissan X Trail is the first car in India to get a variable compression turbo petrol motor. This effectively changes how much the fuel mixture is compressed in the cylinder, so it can shift between a high compression ratio that helps efficiency or a low one that brings more performance at higher revs. In keeping with that, you also realize that this engine, it's not very noisy. There's only a thrum and vibration when you sort of start up, but after that it settles into a fairly quiet linear idle. Now you already know that this has some serious output for a 1.5 litre motor, 163 PS and 300 Newton meters, and you'll be surprised at how it puts it down on the road. It's actually quite effective. It never feels too highly strung, too overstressed. Maybe that variable compression tech that Nissan talks about so much, there really seems to be some meat behind that, so to speak. It really does give you very linear performance just off idle even. In fact, sometimes you might find that it's a bit too energetic off idle, especially in start-stop traffic, where maybe you will want to switch into the eco mode just to sort of tone down the throttle response. This has also to do with the 12-volt mild hybrid system, which Nissan says will add up to 6 Nm for 20 seconds to fill up gaps in the powertrain's torque delivery. In heavier traffic, it's not too intrusive with its start-stop function. Nissan says this can improve efficiency by up to 4%, but we will have to spend a longer stint in the X Trail to find out how this and the new engine tech affect its mileage figures. And when you start sort of picking up speed, you realize that there isn't too much lag to deal with. In fact, there's barely any to speak of. This is aside from the motor slightly losing steam in the higher reaches of the rev band. This is not a problem in isolation, but the performance here isn't quite as potent as some other higher displacement turbos in this segment. But in calmer highway driving, this isn't too much of an issue. The motor is still alert to throttle input, so you don't find it too difficult to hold higher speeds or make overtakes. Now, a big part of how linear this car feels also goes to that CVT gearbox. Of course, you have drive modes, and they do alter, the usual, the steering feel, the throttle response, and even the shift quality, so to speak. But what is really surprising is how well the CVT works. If you aren't too accustomed to CVTs, you'll probably find it quite difficult to even know that it's a CVT. So you do notice that very rarely there's that rubber band effect, but in regular driving, you have that smooth, seamless performance that you want from a CVT. And another great touch is these paddles. Now, in some other cars, these paddles, they really are only ornamental, they don't really do much, but as you can see here, it's really giving you that engine braking, it's really giving you that added acceleration. So in that respect, it really does feel like maybe a torque converter. We didn't get a chance to get deeper into how the X Trail handles, but you do find that the wide tires give it a good sense of grip. You can feel confident over fast sweeping turns. The body movements here are also linear, but you also have a sense of the car's mass, given that this is a tall SUV. The LSD also probably helps with this sense of control, but we would have liked for a more connected feel from the steering wheel. It's quite light and shrinks the car around you in traffic, which is great, but you don't find it to be too communicative at higher speeds, even though it does seem to get heavier. But here, what you do notice that, again, at highway speeds, it's very steady. It's got that steady, long-legged feel to it. So we've been driving for a few hours. We aren't really tired. So long-distance trips will not be too much of a bother in this car. Now, the 20-inch wheels, yeah, the few bumps that we've encountered, yeah, there is a firm edge to it. You do feel the bumps, but it is rounded off to a certain extent, but of course, not as good as, say, a 19-inch. The Nissan X Trail, like before, brings with it a fresh execution of what a premium SUV can be like. The cabin is great in the first two rows, as much as the opinion might be split on how useful the third row is. The cabin's rich ambience, despite some notable feature lapses, is also a win for Nissan. The powertrain also seems more effective in the real world than on paper, but we hope Nissan gets its pricing right in a segment that has some strong established brands.